Good morning, everyone. I can see people joining us now. So welcome to this month's SHEDTalk. I am not your usual host, Maxine Fakara. She is on holiday today because it's her birthday, so she's doing something nice. My name is Tamsin Mann. I'm Director of Policy and Communications at Praxis Oral. I'm very pleased to be introducing today's SHEDTalk with Lucy Findlay, who is Managing Director of the Social Enterprise Mark, who is joining Sean in his shed today. A little bit of housekeeping just before we get started. As usual, you don't have your cameras and you're all muted, but please do continue to ask questions in the chat throughout the conversation, and Sean will pick those up as he goes along, and any that we don't answer during the chat we'll pick up at the end. Obviously, we are being recorded, and this will be made available to Praxis Oral members on the website after the event as usual. So, welcome to Sean Fielding, who's our immediate past chair of Praxis Oral and Director of Impact, Innovation and Business at the University of Exeter. Over to you, Sean.
Well, thank you very much, Tamsin. It's great to be here again, and welcome everybody to the Praxis Oral SHEDTalk, so called because it involves a talk, and at least my end of it happens in my shed here in Devon. And the aim of this series, of course, is to create opportunities for us to meet important people, key stakeholders for the community, and have the kinds of interactions that we might have otherwise had if we'd been going out to conferences and events in the normal run of things. And of course, it's a year and a day since we've all been in lockdown of one form or another. And for me, it's a year and a day of shed living. And personally, I am desperate to get out. Because this is being broadcast from my shed, you will hear the occasional seagull, and you may hear the school that's behind me that every now and then lets its children out for break if they're good. So that's just part of the fun. So today I am delighted to welcome to the shed Lucy Findlay. And Lucy has played a leading role in UK social enterprise. In fact, since the phrase was first invented, which was apparently way back in 2001, and she's worked with and advised many government departments. She's, in the course of that, has received quite a number of awards and nominations, most recently including one of the top 100 women in social enterprise in Europe, 2021, one of the top 100 women in social enterprise in the UK, 2020, Southwest Influential Woman of the Year, 2019, and she was awarded an MBE for services to social enterprise in 2019. She founded the Social Enterprise Mark Company, which is a CIC, in 2010, and now I gather there are mark holders in 11 different countries, a licensing arrangement with the US, partnership arrangements with Ireland and the UAE. And during the pandemic, Lucy became a trustee of the Big Issue Invest Trust. On top of that, she also has the great fortune and good judgment to live in Devon. So Lucy, welcome to the shed.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's heaven in Devon, as they like to say.
Although today, just a slight drizzly rain. So
not with me in Exeter. You know, okay. You're too far south.
Okay, so Lucy, it's great to have you with us, and I think probably we should start with just explaining something about the Social Enterprise Mark. What it is. This is the blind date start. This is what is it, and tell us all about it, and why should we worry about it? Why is it important?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sean. For those of you that might have heard the news this morning, that Boris Johnson said that the reason that vaccines were developed was because of a business model of greed and capitalism. I think this is a particularly appropriate point to intervene and say, actually, we think that business, and a lot of the business world, in fact, think that there is more to business than just making a profit, and that we need a real paradigm shift in terms of thinking about business in order to be able to address both the recovery of from the coronavirus, but also to build a better society and a better world, so that such instances don't happen again. You know, this epidemic is partly due to the challenges that we have in opening up as a world, but also to do with the way in which we have treated the world. And we think that there has to be a different way of doing business. And if you look back historically at how businesses operated, say 100 years ago, we had a very different type of business model. We had the cooperative model, which was set up by the Rochdale pioneers. And there were, you know, big family businesses and Victorian philanthropists that actually felt that doing business was a very good way of actually making a difference to their local communities and involving those local communities. But since the advent of the Harvard business model, which has been taught by a lot of business schools, I think we've kind of got a bit skewed about in the opposite direction, which has meant that what has been taught to people and in the context of globalization has been more about how you can extract as much profit out of a business, invest in it, extract more profit, and then sell it. So there are lots of people around and a lot of businesses that want more from the business model. And there's a big move within business now to look at the purpose-led type of business model. And that's what social enterprise represents. Not only is it a purpose-built model, it is fundamentally about social and environmental issues being at the core of what it does. It makes a profit, but it makes a profit in order to be able to reinvest primarily in making a difference and making a difference at the core of what it does. And even if you look at some of the most ethical businesses, they only put a proportion of their profits into a small proportion. So for instance, some of the biggest ethical brands like Innocent, 10% of their profits are reinvested for social and environmental causes. And on the whole, for corporates, it's just 1 or 2%. What we're talking about is at least 50% of the profits being driven in this way. So why did we come about? We were moved by that issue. A lot of people were talking about, people tend to put social enterprises into a box, which is marked fluffy and towards the sort of more charity end of the of the business world. But actually, there was no way in which to be able to articulate this type of different business model, which is why we developed the social enterprise mark 10 years ago, in order to be able to help those organized differentiate themselves from mainstream business on one side, and then on the other side, donation, grant-led organizations that may be using business techniques and a business model, but fundamentally are not trading either in the open marketplace or with other institutions and organizations. So we developed the first iteration, which is the social enterprise mark, to help those organizations differentiate themselves from that product and to help them to show their social value, because a lot of social enterprises are very good at talking about themselves when you talk to them one-to-one, but actually when you come to look at their literature and what they put up on the on their web pages and their social media, they're not so good at articulating how they make a difference. So that's really what our first motivation was, to develop the social enterprise mark. And then we also felt that there was a need, and talking to others in the sector, there was no ladder of a journey to go on as a social enterprise. So we developed what is now known as the Social Enterprise Gold Mark, which shows excellence in social enterprise. And a number of universities hold our Social Enterprise Gold Mark, as well as our Social Enterprise Mark. And this goes into further depth in looking at things like how the organisation is involving stakeholders, the ethics of that organisation, and also how they create added social value. So it looks at the entirety of the business and makes recommendations about how that organisation can actually move forward and improve in what it does. We've also developed a number of other products, including our Aspiring Mark, which allows people to get onto the journey towards social enterprise. And a couple of years ago, we developed a specialist product for social enterprises that are mainly employing disabled people in order to be able to gain funding from the likes of DWP. So that, in a nutshell, kind of talks about our products and why I think that this area is really a really important area, and one that should actually be taking the lead. These types of businesses should be taking the lead in the build back better stroke levelling up agenda.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic beginning for this conversation, and signpost something we'll come back to later on. I think what do we want society to be like? It seems to me a pretty important conversation to be having at the moment. But can I just press you on the organisations that have the social enterprise mark at the moment? You set out the kinds of things it would show. What do you think they get from that? What do you? And obviously they want to show those things, but what difference does it make to them actually having the mark?
So we regularly conduct a customer survey to look at this. The main benefit of the social enterprise mark is being able to prove those ethical credentials. So you're not just saying you have them, and there's loads of tick box self-assessment stroke, those types of things around, which you can say, yes, I'm doing all of those things. But what we were quite clear about was that this needed to have some robustness to it. So we have an accreditation panel that looks at a selection of the applications and ensures the credibility and the authenticity of the criteria and the evidence that is required, the level of evidence that is required in order to be able to prove that point. So the term actually needs to mean something rather than just being a self-label. And in this era of greenwash, I think that is actually a really important message. So you need to be able to differentiate yourself as a business and be able to say, I am an ethical business and I have this accreditation which goes to prove that. In the case of the Social Enterprise Gold Mark, it does provide a useful framework, and to a certain degree, the Social Enterprise Mark as well, a framework which brings together the social value activities that organisation has been putting together. And for smaller organisations, As I've said, quite often they don't have a marketing department, so that we can help them to articulate, what their added value and their the ways in which they are making a difference. And indeed, even for universities, quite often there's lots of activity that's going on across different departments, and it can help to bring together that activity and some recognition for that. And we can provide an action plan and work with the organisation in order to be able to improve and learn from each other about what will improve that they do, that improve their activity levels. Another aspect to it is that you are part of a worldwide network of social enterprises and practitioners. So I know for universities, for instance, that's really useful because they want to be able to plug in to those that are in local communities and learn from each other about how they are working with social enterprises and what they can benefit more from. So, it's kind of straight from the horse's mouth, if you like. And there is, that proof of excellence. In the case of the Gold Mark, you are able to prove your excellence credentials. So depending on what sector you're in, there are different motivations for the social enterprise mark. In the case of healthcare, for example, it's about being able to prove to your commissioners, for instance, that you have ethical credentials, and that you are operating as a reinvestment model which adds value to healthcare provision and care and social care as well.
Yeah, so I can see that, and it's interesting that what you're trying to do is deal with an ill that's somehow been created by a university, by Harvard, and then somehow and then using universities as a way to try and remedy that ill some way as we go. So I think there's a nice circle there.
Yes.
You're a social enterprise. Obviously, the organisation is a social enterprise itself, and presumably that's pretty important to you personally. In being involved in this world.
Yes, I kind of felt that if we didn't operate as a social enterprise, how could we possibly be an accreditation authority and be authentic if we weren't walking the walk as well? So a really early action for us was to get our own mark. So we do have our own mark, but also, we have also got made sure that we've gone on that accreditation journey ourselves in other areas as well, such as women's equality, disability, and in other areas as well.
And David Secker in the chat, who's one of the founders of Praxis originally, has asked the question about whether Praxis Oral is a social enterprise. The answer is no, David, but the board has considered that, and I think is going to come back to that because our objects are entirely not about generating a corporate profit. They're about helping people to achieve things. So I think there is certainly a potential for Praxis Oral to have a different structure. Whether a social enterprise mark is the right one, we need to look at that. But it's interesting you brought that up, David.
Yeah, I'll just add to that you can have a look at our criteria on our website and match it off. It's not one structure. We're not legally structure led, which is one of the challenges of social enterprise. In some countries, there is a social enterprise legal structure. It's very much in this country, you can be all sorts of different types of organization, which is why we developed the voluntarily led criteria, which you can apply to the organization. So without actually knowing more about Praxis Oral, and it may well be that you are, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. I'll take it from you, Sean, that you're not.
Yeah. Well, not at the moment, but we have an interest. So let's move on then to, we understand what social enterprises are. We understand a bit about the mark and how that might help. And I think as we have this conversation, we'll get into conversations about our role in helping universities create ventures, and how do you make sure those are the right kinds of ventures. I think it's an interesting conversation to be having. But can we just really interested in this, in the idea of becoming an accrediting authority. So, you know, quite often we are dealing in universities with people who have the knowledge and capacity to recognize other people's achievements. You know, essentially that's what universities are. But you know, so a lot of the work we do often with people in when they're setting up businesses or when they're thinking of engaging with partners, there's something like that in the back of their mind. And I'm just interested in the process of how do you go about becoming an accrediting body? Obviously, you're somebody individually who's got a lot of drive and passion, and you can persuade people. But how do you actually get to the point where you assert your authority and people believe you? It's a credible thing. You know, we've now got credibility without it somehow being vested by someone else. What's the process that you go about?
It's a very good question, you know, and maybe I should take some consultancy fees for answering this one, because it is a very challenging thing. And you know, my previous job, which involved running a social enterprise organization from scratch, gave me quite a lot of understanding about how this could happen, and how you go from nothing to basically becoming a well-known, credible organization. And so the fact that I had run an organization before in the sector and was well known in the sector really helped, because we were able to draw together a number of interested parties in the sector, including all of the main stakeholder umbrella type of organizations to consult when we first started out. So that was a bit of a start. But, you know, as you know, with a lot of this partnership work, and certainly with the debate within the social enterprise movement, you can never please everybody. So you have to spend a lot of time, first of all, trying to get it right, but then just go with it, because you're never going to get it completely right, and accept that you will need to adapt things as you go along, which is what we have done. You know, we've adjusted the evidence, the criteria, the ways in which we've worked over the years in response from other organizations, but we've tried to work through you know, the existing social enterprise infrastructure as and where we can. So the other thing that we have done is that we have gone out in order to be able to get the best ambassadors of what we do out there as well. And I know we need to do probably even more of this. So getting you know, some of the more well-known social enterprises to apply for the mark. So for instance, we have the Big Issue, which is a social enterprise that everybody knows about, to get the social enterprise mark and to talk about having the social enterprise mark. The other thing that we did was fairly early on was start to work with the university community, and one particular vice chancellor, who will remain nameless, she saw the opportunity for the social enterprise mark within the university context, and put her name to it, and developed you know, personal links with other vice chancellors. So we had a strategy to because we could see that this could be something that was useful. So we have a set of ambassadors and we have a set of friends that, you know, kind of in high places. We also have been quite opportunistic and enterprising. So where there have been opportunities to work internationally, we have just gone with it. You know, we haven't spent ages thinking through a big international strategy document. We've been quite fleet of foot and found where we've found partners that have matched our values and our you know, our vision, and just started to work with them in ways. And just through trial and error, really, we've found ways in which we have worked. The other thing that we've done more recently is to bring in accreditation expertise onto our board. So we've recruited over the summer a number remotely, a number of new board members, and two of them have run. One is currently running the EFQM Business Excellence model. He's the chief executive of that, which has been really useful because that provides us with a parallel type of mark to be able to compare ourselves with, and someone else who used to run the pensions quality mark. So, you know, getting that experience and learning across, as well as fair trade, which we've had on our expertise from the fair trade community, which has been really useful on our board. So we've learned from others as well.
Yeah, so I think that that's a really interesting description of how you get to a position where you've got critical mass, so that you can then begin to, you build steadily and you get to a point where you can then influence people beyond, and then you get to a tipping point and a takeoff point where everyone needs to have it. I think that's very interesting for some of the things that we're working with, and in fact describes pretty much kind of stage by stage where we got to in the knowledge exchange community with our RTTP accreditation, which is for individuals, but it's basically just accrediting their people's experience in knowledge exchange, and just asserting it, and then gradually, you know, there are now is a global network of about 20,000 people now who are you know, connected through that framework. So it's a really interesting model, I think you described there. So since I've touched on knowledge exchange people, if we focus the conversation a bit more on what this means for us in our community, the knowledge exchange community, there's a kind of tendency, I suspect, to think of, you know, many of us are involved with supporting social enterprises and creating social enterprises of various kinds, but somehow it never seems to capture the interest of policymakers. It's somehow not as sexy as these high-tech commercial spin-outs that everyone you know, wants to see, who are somehow going to drive the future economy. How can we make social enterprises the sexy part?
Yeah, very good question. And I think it's a fundamental issue, actually, Sean. If you talk to children, years ago, we used to go into schools and talk social enterprise when we had Enterprise Week, and we still have Social Enterprise Day, but there was a big drive under previous governments to push up the social enterprise agenda. And we used to go into schools and we would teach children about social enterprise, and it was amazing just to listen to them, because they didn't have this kind of boxed in view of what business was about. They think much more laterally and creatively about business, and I think that gets kind of, it's all about this kind of creativity agenda which gets beaten out of people through our education system. And we need to be much more creative in the ways in which we teach some of these things and the ways in which we nurture, you know, business, and not have such a narrow view of business. So firstly, I would say it is about the education system itself, and making sure that we get a wider view of that. And I think the media doesn't really help with that as well. You know, you get the kind of Dragon's Den version of enterprise, which is all about, oh, how can I invest, and where, you know, what's this going to make for my bottom line? So that hasn't really helped, and we need to change the views of the media about what business is actually about. And then I also think that the challenge is on politicians, because in my experience, when you talk to politicians, they put the business thing over there, and we'll talk to business leaders about how to drive up, you know, the business agenda in order to be able to tackle the Build Back Better / levelling up agenda. But actually, fundamentally, they forget to talk to social enterprises that are leading this. They are actually on the ground working with the local communities and addressing these problems. So automatically they go to kind of the big, it's almost like they have the common, you know, a common approach, which is like business sits in this box. So we all need to get out of these kind of silos. And I took quite a lot of comfort. I know that you're at the University of Exeter, but I went to talk to a number of first-year students about social enterprise a couple of years ago, and I asked, the room was completely full, you know, it was an evening, and I was like, wow, this is just incredible. And I said to them,
not much to do in Exeter, you know.
Yeah, it's obviously that Exeter's so good. But anyway, I asked them, who in here is with the business school, is doing a business, and I think it was only about 2 people that put up their hands. And I said, oh, well, where are you all from? And it was a huge range of different disciplines that were interested in the social enterprise agenda, including the medical school. So, you know, it's about thinking much more laterally about the business models and trying to integrate it into all of the different disciplines in how you think about life in general. You know, and for instance, Northampton University are a social enterprise gold mark and holder, and they talk to all of their undergraduates about social innovation in every single discipline, no matter where you come from. So it's about understanding that, and it's also about you know, staff understanding more, because if you look at what's happened, for instance, with the AstraZeneca jab, you know, the drive there from the innovators is actually to make a difference. And most academics are not there to make, you know, huge bucks. It's about how can my innovation actually make a difference. So it could be applied to the sexy side technology as well, because it's not a topic in its own right, social enterprise. Social enterprise can be applied to any situation. So we need to have more read across into those STEM type of subjects as well, I think.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating, isn't it? Because I don't think you're saying that there's a disconnect between being a social enterprise and making a lot of money, you know. But people might assume that. They may say, oh, this, you know, we're going to create a lifestyle business here rather than a business that's going to make a difference. But actually what we're trying to do is create businesses that make a difference. And if they make a difference and they make money as well, but they generally have to make money in order to make a difference, don't they? So
well, yeah, I always say that, and that's another problem that I have with some of the education of social enterprise. Because if you I've looked at a number of courses, and the sort of fundamental principle about setting up a social enterprise within the business school context often seems to be these are led by making a difference. But actually, you can't make a difference if you don't make any money. So actually, you've got to have that part in there. And when I've looked at courses, that's often where it falls down, because people will say, yes, I've got this great idea that I want to set up a social enterprise for, and I'm a social entrepreneur. I really want to drive this forward. And I go, okay, how are you going to make that work? And how is it going to generate money? And that's almost seen as a bit of a dirty word, particularly amongst women, I think. It's like, we don't like to talk about money. We just want to make a difference. And, actually charging for our services and getting people to value for them. It's like, well, people won't pay for them. Well, if there's something that is of value to them, they will. And if they're too poor, or they can't afford your services, have you got a business model that can cross-subsidize that activity, which will then enable you to be able to do more of that? And you may be able to apply for grants to do some of that work, but that is not your fundamental business model, because if you keep on applying for grants, you are at the behest of that grant giver. And if that grant giver says, I've got a different priority and I'm not going to give you any more money, then you can no longer, deliver your business. So that has been like the kind of revelation that I've found over the years. If you are reliant on somebody else giving you the money, then you are actually acting in a way that is quite unbusinesslike. So you've got to get people to value your product and be able to prepare and prepared to pay for it, and then use that to cross-subsidize, some of your more social activities.
Yeah, we had a question from Jess Hurrell in the chat, which I think we've probably dealt with, setting up this this conflict between social enterprise and generating income. And I think you've managed that. You answered that very well. But Emily Davis is also, Emily's, I think, involved with student enterprises. And that's obviously a key part of the education that you've been talking about. How do we encourage student enterprises to think about operating in this way? But she's got an interesting take on this, which is, if you've got a business that's been started in one sort of model, more of a social enterprise, and can that be part of a pivot, say, that a startup might take?
Yes, the answer is yes to that. We do have a number of organisations that have pivoted and changed their business model. So we advise organisations on how they can do that. In some cases, it may require a change of legal structure, but in the majority of cases, it doesn't. It's just about gaining the permission of the directors of the organisation to insert some clauses into their governing documents to say that they will not extract a personal profit of more than 50% of their profits. And, for that to be in there and checked, we check that every year. So that is the answer. You can pivot the business. It doesn't have to be too complicated. And indeed, in the US, where we have, where there is no sort of, there's far fewer legal types of structures. We've developed an agreement which businesses can sign to sign up to the basis of the criteria. So they don't actually have to change their business model. And we would argue you don't have to change the business model in our case as well. So you get companies that are limited by shares that can, you know, just insert articles into their existing documentation and prove that they are doing what they have said on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, so I think that probably answers David Secker's question, you know, earlier on about organisations like us, you know, could easily become social enterprises.
Exactly. And, you know, I can't imagine that Praxis Oral is taking huge profits distribution.
Totally.
If you're making a profit, hurrah at the moment, you know. And in fact, that's another thing that people say, oh, you know, if you're a social enterprise and you don't make a profit, you know, would you take the social enterprise mark away from you? It's like, well, actually, businesses are all over the place are making a loss at the moment. You know, that is life. You know, if you continue to make a loss, then, you know, obviously you're going to go out of business. But, you know, we're not judging the profitability of that organization. It's just how they would reinvest and, you know, what their motivations are for running that business.
So we talked about the structure of the business. What about the individuals, people who are thinking about setting up, being a social entrepreneur? What do you think the environment is like for people who want to develop social entrepreneurship? Do they get the support they need? Is there the right kind of training and support for them? What's your thinking about social entrepreneurs?
Yeah, it's an interesting term, and it wasn't until many years into my social enterprise experience that I realized there's a difference between a social entrepreneur and a social enterprise, because it's about an individual. And an individual doesn't necessarily set up a social enterprise. So that's one thing to get straight. A social entrepreneur can be setting up, there's three ways a social entrepreneur can be operating. One, they can be running a normal for-profit, but have some social motivation. Number two, they can be running a social enterprise. And number three, they could be setting up a charity, which is grant-led. So that's a fundamental point to get over. In the context of a social entrepreneur that is setting up a social enterprise, I would say no, there isn't the support that is needed. There are some really good organisations out there, like Unlimited, who we work quite closely with, and you know, they're a foundation that can provide some kickstart funding for organisations and loan finance as well as grants, and they're great. But what we've seen over the years is that steadily the kind of the government-led business support becoming smaller and smaller. There was, you know, years ago, we argued that there was a need for business support to be provided, specialist business support to be provided for social enterprises, but that has been cut from funding, and I have found that, you know, you just have to go to the standard business support offers. So recently I engaged in the small business leadership program, which is I think it's being morphed into something else by the Chancellor, a leadership program led by a number of universities, which is like a potted MBA in 8 weeks, which is quite a challenge. But again, it is aimed at the standard business model, which is, you know, profit extraction, etc. But there is a lot of useful stuff that you can get out of those sorts of courses. So I would say, you know, if there are business courses out there, then that is a very useful thing to do. The other barrier, I would say, is finance. Because social enterprises can't attract equity because of the way that in which they're set up, there are a lack of financial opportunities that are open to the standard profit extraction model. So for instance, we can't attract business angels. who would invest in order to be able to exit at some point. And that is a constant frustration. So we are dependent on loan finance, and loan finance has its challenges because of the need for assets that sit behind it and security. So getting unsecured loan finance is often the only way for social enterprises to grow, and that is expensive. So we end up paying a lot more money over the existing Bank of England interest rate, with the exception of the latest offer from the government, which is the bounce back loans, which has been quite useful. But actually, for startup social enterprises, they don't have a track record, so they can't even access that. So that is an ongoing problem, and where organisations like Unlimited come in, but it does leave a bit of a hole for social enterprises. So a lot of social entrepreneurs end up putting in their own money in order to be able to start the thing off, at least.
Yeah, which is going to cause a problem for scale up as well.
Exactly.
Well, let's move on to the slightly more macro picture, which comes back to build back better and all of that. So if we are building back better, do you think we need to be reassessing this Harvard model? Do we need to get to a position where social enterprise will be more valued in what's better, or are we just going to build back the same? Are we going to end up with the same load of high street chains stores rather than a whole load of independents? What do you think the future is going to be for social enterprise in a better built back Britain?
Yeah, I think it will be up to us, really. I don't see that the government is leading on this. And I'm quite disheartened. You probably, your listeners will probably have heard that the industrial strategy has been dropped, and now we've got the Build Back Better mantra, which is focusing in on infrastructure and big things. I don't know whether Scottish bridges are included in that, but anyway, it's so disheartening, and it's so centralised as well. And I think we have to keep it in perspective and do it ourselves. And the social enterprise business model does do that. But the challenge is, kind of getting our voice heard above all of that noise. And I think what we need to do is to join up with far more other organisations that are fitting with our values. So for instance, universities is a good example of people and organisations that understand what we're trying to do, and how we can't just carry on doing the same thing. We see the Concordat, the Knowledge Exchange Concordat, the Civic universities agenda is all playing to that piece that actually it's about more. And I know that knowledge exchange professionals and experts really understand that. So I think they should be coming up, that we need to recognise those types of roles, those kind of brokers within cities and regions, and enable them to help those communities help themselves and lead the recovery. And if you look at the history of places like Scotland, where they have got a great heritage of community not just engagement, but just community development. That's where we need to get to. It's not led by government, it's led by us, but we need more allies to do that. And we dearly need to then get the government to understand that case and prove it, I'm so old that I remember the first time round with you know, the single regeneration budget and the work that Michael Heseltine did in the Docklands, and we saw there that communities were just displaced. We had some nice, bright, shiny buildings, but actually, what did it do for those communities? And then we saw the, you know, the Conservative government at the time then realised actually we need to engage with local communities. And then the Labour government came in and said, yes, we want to set up a new deal for communities and that communities need to lead that. We've lost it. I suspect we're on that cycle, you know, we will go back and eventually they'll begin to realise actually we need to involve the people in doing this because they know what their communities need and they know what the gaps are.
Yeah, I think you're reminding me of my age too, because I think SRB project was the first major project I did in a university situation. So
okay,
yeah, let's go back a while. If we're going to shape a new way of doing things, I think it's a very helpful call to arms you've given us there about the role of knowledge exchange professionals in helping to move the dial really on what building back better means. And you touched on the KE Concordat, and that's probably a good point for us to kind of bring it back to an area where we could make a difference. How do you see the social enterprise mark and the KE Concordat working together in some way? I mean, is there a way in which the mark helps when you're thinking about your KE Concordat return?
Yeah, it's a good question and it's an evolving one, and we had a good conversation about this and the Civic University's agenda with in a webinar for London Hire a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's a tool that can help you think through some of your responses, and indeed we've got a webinar coming up which I can probably circulate to your members if that would be useful, that we're running with Universities UK on the Concordat and how the social enterprise mark accreditation, the gold mark accreditation, can help self-reflection as well on, you know, using that methodology and actually thinking things through more laterally. So it's about the methodology, and obviously it's about the evidence that is provided and feeding that into the process. Obviously there's proof there as well because it is accredited and it has been through our certification panel. So, you know, it has that endorsement in a sense that I know has been kind of resisted in it being another accreditation for universities to go through with the Concordat. So it's about using the existing evidence and adding to that. I think probably we'll discover more about that in our discussions with Universities UK and the Concordat team, because it still is a very emerging model. I know that they are just looking through the evidence at the moment, and certainly Paul Manners from you, he runs the Watermark, can't remember what it's, NCPPE, yes. Yeah, he said he's been looking through a number of the submissions, and social enterprise has been mentioned in there, and it would be quite a useful thing if we could to look at across the board at what, you know, where social enterprise has been mentioned and how we could build on that existing evidence as well. But it is an emerging piece, so you know, we're looking to make the links as much as we can at this early stage, but I think there's more that we can do, including, you know, more case studies and showing of how universities have actually used it, because that's the other thing that we're going to be doing. We're engaging Winchester to talk through their accreditation process and journey and how it helped them reflect and contribute to their Concordat response.
Well, that would be very helpful. I think if we could circulate that that webinar details, I think many people would be interested in taking part in that. So, Lucy, I think this has been a really fascinating discussion. I think you've opened up a whole set of conversations that I think strikes a chord with many people in the knowledge exchange profession. I think there are plenty of us who are seeing impact in all kinds of different ways, and are looking to help people achieve things in all kinds of different ways. And since our members are operating across all of those disciplines where those students were, you know, in all those non-business school disciplines as well as the business school,
yeah,
you know, we recognize those interests really strongly, I think. So it's really good to know that we've got a kindred spirit in you, Lucy, and we know where to find you now, which is great. And I think there's some real food for thought that you've created for everybody. So I think we will close this, and I will say thank you very much, Lucy, for all your contribution, and invite Tamsin to tell us about what's happening next. But thank you very much on behalf of the community, Lucy. That's really helpful, and I hope you will get a lot of interest from about your webinar, particularly.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for hosting me. I'll put my contact details in the chat as well, so people know how to get hold of me, and also our website details.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you so much, Lucy. That was brilliant. Thank you, Sean. A really interesting chat there. It really struck a chord with me. So many things that Lucy talked about in terms of accreditation, and in Andy Haldane's words from yesterday's Industrial Strategy Council farewell, you can't level up from the top down. So those, you know, really interesting conversation there, and certainly plenty for us to reflect on. Thank you everybody for coming. We will obviously be in touch about the next SHEDTalk, which should be in around a month's time. And I will just thank the Praxis Oral team who kept Zoom on the go. Yeah, so we'll see you next time. Thanks everybody. Thanks Sean. Thanks Lucy.
Bye everyone. Thank you.